Thank you. Thank you for accepting this talk. And as you can see from the title, this is an archaeobotanical study that focuses on hunter-gatherers in Sudan. Now, before I dive into the site and tell you more about the location and everything else, I wanted to give you a little background on the current state of research of archaeobotany in the area. And to do that, I have placed this map of Sudan where you can see currently recognized or well-defined excavated sites that are located along the Nile and inland in some cases. However, there are many more, there are numerous prehistoric sites in the area, out of which many of them are only recognized through surveys and have been badly preserved, so the excavation was not possible. Furthermore, to give you an idea about the archaeobotany in the area, I have placed these other photos here, which show you how we get to reconstruct hunter-gatherers, plant-related activities in the area. And that is mostly through these plant impressions in pottery, which are not very good evidence of plant processing or consumption. And furthermore, on the well-known association of the presence of stone tools or stone grinders and querns at the site, which we then relate with plant processing and plant-related activities, although the direct associations or evidence is often lacking. So what is furthermore specific about Sudan is that the preservation of the sites is very poor. So we have very poor stratigraphy. Sites are very eroded because what we are working is sands and dunes. There are many winds which affect the sites and so on. And furthermore, the preservation of plants, the soil or the sediment is not very favorable for the preservation of plants. So those are some of the difficulties we are dealing with in the area. Now, the case study of this research is located in just south of the country's capital, Khartoum, along the White Nile, so one of the Niles. And this is the current environment in the area. You can see that that's a very, very highly dry environment, desert. And here on the topographic map of the site, you can see that the site of Al-Khiday is actually a cluster of 1, 2, 3, 4, minimum of 4 sites, although there are many more where it was not possible to excavate as they are poorly preserved and eroded. But the better preserved areas are these two mounds, 16D3 and D5, which are reminiscents of the old dunes. And then these slightly more flat areas in between them, which are 16D4 and 16D4B. Now, we know that these two elevated areas were locations of the settlement, and then in between those two areas were sort of two functional areas or extensions of the settlement, where we had many evidence of pits. You can see how the site looked at these photos below. Now, many evidence of the pits, potholes, and activity areas. Now, the chronology I'm working with is related with the period of Mesolithic, although the site itself extends from there are traces of Paleolithic in the area, but the site itself extends from pre-Mesolithic with the burials which were excavated at the site, and then the actual traces of the settlement started in the early Mesolithic through the middle Mesolithic phases up to the early late Mesolithic, and then there is a hiatus where the community started to become more mobile and started to become pastoralist with patchy sort of evidence of the Neolithic occupation. Now, what we know, because this site has been excavated for the past 1 year, what we know about these communities that lived in the area is that they were primarily fishers. Then they were hunters, and presumably, finally, they were gatherers. Now, what we're working with at the archaeological excavations are many evidence of fish bones, many remains of fish, combined together with evidence of fishing. So we have many harpoons or hooks, many bone artifacts that were used to produce tools for fishing. Furthermore, this is the community that produced pottery since the earliest occupation phase. So we know that it was possible to store this excessive amount of food, that they were salting the fish. We know that they use grinding stone tools, although some of them have traces of ochre, so we don't necessarily relate them to plant-related activities. And then What we also know is that these communities went through some of the climatic changes that were happening in the area that they were living in. So what we don't know about these communities from the archaeological standpoint is their plant input in the subsistence strategies. We know they were fishers, we know they were hunting, but we don't have direct evidence of plants. Now that aspect became important to research because we know that this community, once they settled, started to be affected by the increased aridity in the area. So when they initially settled in the area, the whole environment was a lot more humid, and then slowly all of the lakes or water catchments in the area started to dry out, and they had to rely more and more on the main river course of the Nile rather than the other marshes or swamps or lakes that would have been around them. So we wanted to ask a few questions or that I will try to cover today. One of them was what plants were they gathering, because we don't know anything about the plant input at the site. Were they processing those plants? And finally, were there any changes related to plant acquisition and processing that could have been a consequence of these environmental changes? To do so, we have used a multi-proxy analysis, which combined macrobotanical analysis consisting of flotation samples from which we recovered the seeds and fruits, and finally microbotanical analysis, which combined phytoliths and starch, which would be microbotanical evidence of plants, which can be used to reconstruct sometimes environmental aspects of the area, but in this case, plant parts that could have been processed using the grinding stone tools. So we wanted to see whether they were processing whether they were processing plants at all. If they were processing them, what stages those were. Did they work with the clean grains? Did they work with the husk and with the leaves? And what was happening here plant-wise? So those are the three proxies from which we try to get the information. Now for the results, we know from the macrobotanical remains that were recovered from the samples is that there is a variety of small grasses present. Starting with the obvious, you can see here on the left, those are small millets, probably setaria. Finally, there are also pulses or fabaceae, which is not such a common find, especially in the region of Sudan. Then well-expected sedges and Cyperus and Polygonaceae, which are present along the Nile, so that is not a surprise. Then we also have some weedy taxa or plants that today we would recognize as weeds, but some of them could have also been eaten if they were leaf plants. And finally, we have some fruits such as Celtis and Ziziphus, which have a thick endocarp that you would have to crack. So those were some of the foods that were easily accessible. What is interesting, or what is important to notice, is that Celtis, in this case J, here at the slide, requires a lot of water, and we only see it in the earlier layers. Now, as we go towards the end of the Mesolithic, Celtis disappears, and that is sort of in agreement with the increased aridity of the area. That means that some of the plants have changed, some of the environment have changed, and they have responded to it in a such manner that the use of fabaceae compared to grasses also started to increase. However, that is the only difference that can be seen. Overall, the assemblage doesn't change much through time. Now, when it comes to phytoliths, they are sort of putting the focus on grasses as well. But we also have just like in the macros, a presence of Cyperaceae or sedges. I do see some palms there, and also dicots or woody shrubs or trees. And finally, for the results from the starch grains, something that should be excluded as contamination, and it's not part of, probably not archaeological, is the presence of triticea or wheat and barley starch at the grinding stone tools. That is a very common contamination in modern day and age. It happens either at the excavation, comes with the food, or in the lab, in any part of the processing. However, what is in accordance with or in the agreement with the rest of the results is the presence of panicoids, or especially in this case, most probably small millets, and Andropogonae, or something that could be an andropogon, or maybe some wild sorghum, or something that is very local in the area. And finally, the fourth type of starch that was recognized is an underground storage organ, but because of the lack of reference collection, it is not very easy, or it is difficult to say what kind of storage organs that would have been in particular. Something that starch is very useful for, and I have not found it here, is the signal from pulses or from the Fabaceae. And considering I do see them present in the macrobotanical assemblage, it indicates that those pulses were processed in a different way. So we see that grasses were grinded or processed using these grinders, but the Fabaceae were probably boiled or parched or processed in a different manner compared to the grasses. And I hope this short presentation gives you an idea of the importance of integrated approach, where we do get different or signals of different plants, of different processes, or different plant parts. Considering if we take a look into the phytolate, starch, or macrobotanical remains, I would like to point out that these it is I believe clear that groundstone tools were multi-purpose tools, and that not all of them were used for processing grasses, as we saw the traces of ochre, or they could have been also used for tool production and different purposes, right? But however, I hope that this presentation illustrates that these fisher hunters were also gatherers, and that they have truly exploited their environment to the fullest, and consumed or gathered and processed a variety of grasses, especially focusing on panicoids, with again minor differences over time, even though there were climatic changes happening. And finally, I would like to say thank you to my supervisors and the site's director for providing the material, and also to the funding body that enabled this study. Thank you.